Imagine a world where the weight of human existence, the crushing grief of a lost love, the gnawing anxiety of a missed deadline, the hollow ache of Sunday afternoon with nothing to do, has been rendered entirely obsolete by a single shimmering half-gram tablet. This is not a dream of the distant future, nor is it a Silicon Valley fever dream whispered in the glass corridors of Palo Alto. It is a vision that coalesced in the mind of a nearly blind man sitting in a quiet room in 1931, watching the world he knew crumble into the gears of a machine it didn't understand. Welcome to Boring History, where today we peel back the skin of the 20th century to examine the origins of a nightmare dressed in neon and velvet. We are talking about Aldous Huxley and the birth of the ultimate sedative, soma. To understand the drug, we must first understand the man who hallucinated it into being before the technology to create it even existed. Aldous Leonard Huxley was not merely an observer of his time, he was a biological aristocrat, a scion of an intellectual dynasty that viewed the world through the lens of Darwinian struggle and scientific inevitability. His grandfather was Thomas Henry Huxley, famously known as Darwin's bulldog, the man who fought the Victorian Church to ensure that evolution took its rightful place at the head of the table. To be a Huxley was to carry the burden of the future on one's shoulders. It was a family where brilliance was expected, and the soul was often treated as a complicated chemical equation waiting to be solved. But Aldous was different. While his brother Julian became a world-renowned biologist, Aldous was struck by an infection called keratitis punctata at the age of 16, leaving him virtually blind for years. He learned to read Braille and play the piano by touch, and when his sight partially returned, he viewed the world with a detached, clinical clarity. He saw the shapes of things rather than their details, a perspective that allowed him to see the grand, terrifying patterns of human history without being distracted by the mundane. The year was 1931, and the air in London felt heavy with the scent of coal smoke and desperation. The Great Depression was no longer a news headline, it was a physical presence, a ghost that sat at every dinner table. The optimistic hum of the Roaring Twenties had vanished, replaced by the rhythmic clanking of breadlines and the rising, dissonant voices of political extremists. In the East, the Soviet experiment was turning into a gray monolith of state control. In the West, the gears of capitalism were grinding to a halt. It was in this atmosphere of profound instability that Huxley began to write Brave New World. He was not looking for a way to save the world through politics, because he believed politics was a crude instrument. Instead, he looked toward biology. He looked toward the pharmacy. He realized that the most effective way to control a population was not through the whip, but through the whisper of a chemical promise. Huxley's vision of the future was a direct reaction to the philosophy of Henry Ford. To the people of 1931, Ford was more than a simple industrialist. He was a secular god. He had perfected the assembly line, proving that if you broke a complex task into small, repeatable motions, you could produce anything, cars, clocks, or even culture with terrifying efficiency. Huxley saw this and asked a simple, devastating question. What happens when we apply the assembly line to the human soul? If we can mass-produce a Model T, why can't we mass-produce happiness? The world state, the setting of his masterpiece, was built on the foundation of community, identity, and stability. But stability is a difficult thing to maintain when humans are naturally prone to the turbulence of emotion. Evolution has spent millions of years refining our ability to feel pain, fear, and longing, because those are the tools of survival. To create a stable society, Huxley realized, you would have to declare war on biology itself. The weapon of choice in this war was soma. In the novel, soma is described as having all the advantages of Christianity and alcohol, none of their defects. It is the perfect commodity. It provides a lunar eternity of peace, a vacation from the self that requires no travel, no effort, and carries no hangover.
In 1931, the concept of a psychotropic drug that could reliably alter mood without physical degradation was pure science fiction. The most common sedatives of the time were barbiturates and bromides, clumsy, dangerous substances that often left the user lethargic or addicted. But Huxley was imagining something cleaner, something that worked on the very synapses of the brain to prune away the thorns of discontent. He saw that the ultimate tyranny would not be one that people resisted, but one that people stood in line to purchase. As Huxley sat in his study, peering through thick lenses at the pages of his manuscript, he was crafting a world where the concept of suffering had been deleted from the dictionary. In the world state, if you feel a pang of loneliness, you take a pill. If you feel the sting of rejection, you take two. If you are faced with a truth that is too heavy to carry, you take a soma holiday and drift away into a haze of golden light. This was his great insight, that the greatest threat to freedom was not the presence of pain, but the absence of it. A man who is suffering will eventually rebel. A man who is perfectly chemically satisfied will never even think to ask why his chains are made of silk. Huxley was writing a satire, but as the ink dried on the page, the satire began to look more and more like a blueprint. The brilliance of the Soma vision lies in its subtlety. It represents the transition from the age of scarcity to the age of abundance. In the past, rulers controlled their subjects by withholding things, food, safety, or information. But in Huxley's future, the rulers control the subjects by giving them everything they think they want. It is a world of total distraction. Why worry about the loss of democracy when there are the feelies to watch and high-voltage golf to play? Why worry about the meaning of life when a half-gram of soma can provide a simulated version of enlightenment for the price of a candy bar? Huxley saw that the human mind is a fragile thing, easily overwhelmed by the vastness of the universe. Soma is the shield that protects the mind from the terror of its own insignificance. But as we move deeper into the 1930s, we see that Huxley's vision was not just a response to industrialism, but a reflection of his own personal struggles with reality. He was a man who lived in his head because his eyes had failed him. He understood the allure of the internal world, the desire to escape the sharp edges of a physical reality that was often cruel and blurry. For Huxley, soma was a metaphor for the many ways we choose to blind ourselves. It was the predecessor to the television, the precursor to the endless scroll of the smartphone, and the spiritual ancestor of the modern pharmaceutical industry. He saw that we were moving toward a painless civilization, but he wondered what would be left of the human spirit once all the friction was removed. As part one of our journey concludes, we leave Huxley in 1931, a man haunted by the silence of his own prophecy. He has created the world state, he has established the cult of Ford, and he has placed the first bottle of soma on the shelf. The world is ready to be seduced. The dream is about to begin.
The dream begins not with a bang, but with the soft, rhythmic hum of a conveyor belt. In the world Huxley envisioned, the messy, visceral tragedy of human birth had been replaced by the sterile precision of the central London hatchery and conditioning center. Here, life does not emerge from the warmth of a womb, it is decanted from a bottle. This is the first pillar of the Huxleyan prophecy, the industrialization of the human soul. To understand the seduction of the world state, one must first understand the Bokanovsky process. It was a biological assembly line where a single egg could be shocked into budding into 96 identical twins. This wasn't just a scientific feat, it was a political masterstroke. It was the end of the individual and the birth of the social body. Huxley saw that the greatest threat to stability was uniqueness. If every man is a snowflake, the blizzard is unpredictable. But if every man is a uniform component in a machine, the machine never breaks. As we step into this brave new world, we see the rows of glass jars, the test tube babies of a future that felt impossible in 1931 but feels uncomfortably plausible today. The world state's motto is community, identity, stability, but these words have been hollowed out and refilled with something synthetic. Identity is no longer something you discover, it is something assigned to you by the predestinators. Before you are even a flicker of consciousness, your destiny is decided. Are you an alpha, destined for leadership and intellectual labor? Or are you an epsilon, stunted by oxygen deprivation in the bottle, destined to spend your life performing the menial tasks that keep the gears of the city turning? Huxley's genius lay in his realization that people do not need to be forced into their roles if they are conditioned to love them. This is the velvet glove of his dystopia. Unlike the iron fist of George Orwell's 1984, Huxley's world is built on the foundation of manufactured consent. The conditioning begins in the nursery. We see the delta infants being presented with books and flowers, only to be met with painful electric shocks. This is Pavlovian psychology taken to its logical, cruel extreme. By the time these children grow up, they will have an instinctive, physical revulsion toward nature and literature. Why? Because nature is free, and books encourage solitary reflection. Neither of these things contributes to the consumption of goods or the stability of the state. Instead, they are conditioned with hypopedia, sleep teaching. Thousands of repetitions whispered under pillows every night until the suggestions become the only truth they know. I'm so glad I'm a beta. I don't want to be an alpha, they work too hard. And I'm glad I'm not a gamma because they're so ugly. By the time the child wakes, their soul has been stitched together from slogans. But conditioning is only the beginning. To keep a population from revolting, you must provide them with something more powerful than fear. You must provide them with distraction. In the world state, the concept of the past is not just forgotten, it is actively loathed. History is bunk, says Mustafa Mond, the resident world controller for Western Europe, quoting the real-world industrialist Henry Ford. To Huxley, the destruction of history was the destruction of the human context. If you have no past, you have no standards by which to judge the present. You are trapped in an eternal now, a perpetual state of infantile gratification. This is where the cult of Ford comes in. In this society, the Christian cross has had its top chopped off to become a T in honor of the Model T Ford. Production is the new religion, efficiency is the new grace, and the ultimate sacrament of this religion is soma. Soma is the chemical lubricant that keeps the social machine from grinding to a halt. It is the perfect drug, all the benefits of alcohol and Christianity without any of the hangovers or the sins. If a citizen feels a flicker of doubt, a momentary pang of loneliness, or the briefest shadow of existential dread, they simply take a half-gram tablet. 1 cubic centimeter cures 10 gloomy sentiments, the saying goes. Soma is the ultimate tool of the state because it makes the prison walls invisible. It provides a holiday from reality, a way to escape the self without ever actually changing the circumstances of one's life. Huxley was fascinated by the idea of a drug that could offer transcendence on demand. He saw it as the ultimate consumer product, the commodification of peace of mind. Yet soma is only one part of the sensory buffet. The citizens of the world state are kept in a state of constant, low-level stimulation. They have the feelies, a form of cinema where you don't just see and hear the actors, but you feel every touch and smell every scent. It is a total immersion in the superficial.
There is no room for high art or deep tragedy, because tragedy requires suffering, and suffering is the enemy of stability. Shakespeare is banned, not because it is subversive in a political sense, but because it is too emotionally complex. In the world state, if you can't express it in a slogan, it isn't worth feeling. This leads to a society that is physically adult, but emotionally embryonic. They are pneumatic and beautiful, but they are hollow. The most radical aspect of Huxley's vision was his dismantling of the family. Everyone belongs to everyone else is the social mandate. Monogamy, romance, and parental bonds are viewed as disgusting, primitive relics of the viviparous past. By eliminating the family, the state eliminates the primary source of private loyalty. There is no mother to mourn, no father to rebel against, and no spouse to prioritize over the collective. Sex is a social duty, a casual recreation devoid of intimacy. By making everything available, the state makes nothing meaningful. Huxley understood a profound psychological truth, that human desire is fueled by longing, and longing is fueled by absence. By removing absence, by ensuring every appetite is immediately satisfied, the state effectively kills desire itself. What is left is a flat gray sea of contentment. As we move deeper into the 1930s, we see Huxley watching the world catch up to his nightmare. He saw the rise of mass media and the way it was being used to bypass the rational mind. He saw the way advertisements were beginning to use the same conditioning techniques he described in the hatcheries. He realized that the greatest threat to freedom wasn't that books would be burned, but that people would simply stop reading them. He feared a world where the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. In the world state, there is no censor, there is only the noise. There is the constant music, the synthetic perfumes, the endless games of electromagnetic golf. It is a world where nobody is ever alone, because loneliness is the breeding ground for thought. Huxley himself was a man of profound solitude. His failing eyes had forced him into a life of inner contemplation, and he looked upon the frantic busyness of the modern world with a mixture of pity and terror. He knew that the Soma dream was a lie, but he also knew how badly people wanted to believe it. He saw that the human spirit is often terrified of its own depth. We crave the shining surface of things because the depths are dark and cold. The world state is the ultimate realization of that craving. It is a civilization that has traded its soul for a permanent sense of well-being. It is a world without winter, without old age, and without grief. But as Huxley would soon show us through the eyes of his protagonists, it is also a world without love. As part 2 of our exploration into Huxley's vision draws to a close, the architecture of the world state stands complete. The bottles are being filled, the slogans are being whispered, and the soma is being distributed. The trap is set, and it is lined with velvet. We have seen how the society functions, but we have yet to see what happens when the machinery encounters the one thing it cannot process: a human being who wants to suffer. The stage is now set for a collision between the sterilized perfection of the new world and the raw, bleeding reality of the old. The dream has become a reality, but the dreamer is about to wake.
The awakening begins with a man named Bernard Marx, an alpha plus who carries the weight of a physical defect that the world state's precision was never supposed to allow. In a world where every bottle is monitored and every embryo is balanced, Bernard is a whisper of an error. He is shorter than his peers, a biological anomaly that has fostered a psychological isolation. While his fellow alphas move through life with the easy grace of those who belong, Bernard stands on the periphery, looking in at a party to which he was invited but never truly welcomed. It is rumored that during his gestation, a lab technician mistakenly added alcohol to his blood surrogate, a ghost in the machine that left him with a soul too large for his stunted frame. This physical inadequacy is the catalyst for his descent. In the world state, if you do not fit the mold, you begin to question why the mold exists at all. Bernard's tragedy is not that he hates the system, but that he desperately wants to be the kind of man who could love it. Beside him stands Lenina Crown, the aesthetic ideal of the New World. She is a woman of uncomplicated pleasures, a creature of conditioning who moves through her days with the rhythmic certainty of a pendulum. To Lenina, the world is a series of colorful surfaces and pleasant sensations. She is pneumatic, a term the citizens use to describe the supple, bouncy perfection of a well-maintained machine. She represents the target audience of this utopia, someone who never asks why, because how is so delightful. When Bernard invites her to accompany him to the savage reservation in New Mexico, she accepts not out of a desire for knowledge, but because it is a fashionable excursion, a chance to see the uncivilized from the safety of a high-altitude helicopter. For Lenina, the trip is a vacation. For Bernard, it is a desperate search for something that feels real, even if that reality is painful. The journey to the reservation is a transition from the sterile to the stained. As their blue rocket plane crosses the boundary of the electrified fence, they leave behind the world of glass and chrome for a landscape of red dust and jagged rock. The fence is a crucial metaphor in Huxley's geography, a 60,000-volt barrier that separates the curated dream from the wild, unkempt nightmare of history. Inside the fence, people still grow old, they still give birth, they still believe in gods that demand sacrifice rather than gods that provide chemicals. As Bernard and Lenina descend into the village of Malpai, the sensory assault begins. Lenina is horrified. She sees wrinkles for the first time, the sagging skin of the elderly that the world state has abolished through hormone replacements and synthetic youth. She smells the scent of unwashed bodies and the copper tang of blood from a ritual dance. To her, this is not culture, it is a malfunction. She reaches for her soma, the chemical shield that keeps the world at a comfortable distance, but Bernard stops her. He wants to see, he wants to feel the discomfort, for in that discomfort, he finds a fleeting sense of self. It is in this dust-choked arena of the old world that they encounter the most profound anomaly of all, John, a young man with golden hair and blue eyes, dressed in the rags of the savages, but speaking the language of the lost. John is the son of Linda, a beta- from the world state, who was lost during a similar excursion 20 years prior. Linda had been left behind, pregnant and abandoned, forced to survive in a world where her conditioning was a liability rather than an asset. She is a grotesque figure now, obese, toothless, and weathered by the sun, a walking memento mori of what happens to the human form when the world state stops maintaining it. Her son, John, is the product of two worlds. He was raised on the myths of the Zuni and the fragmented memories of his mother's London, but his soul was forged by a third, unexpected influence. In the dirt of the reservation, he had found a discarded book, the complete works of William Shakespeare. This book is the ultimate weapon against the world state. While the citizens of London speak in slogans and three-word sentences designed to minimize thought, John speaks in the rich volcanic language of the Elizabethan stage. He has a word for every emotion that the world state has tried to delete. He knows of sorrow, honor, and fidelity. He understands that the readiness is all, a concept entirely alien to a society that believes the readiness is simply a matter of taking a half-gram tablet. To John, the world is a place of high drama and moral stakes. To the world state, it is a playground of leisure and biological stasis. When Bernard looks at Lenina, he does not see a pneumatic sexual object. He sees a goddess, a creature from the brave new world his mother described with such longing. He quotes Miranda from The Tempest, his voice trembling with a hope that the reader knows is doomed. "Oh, brave new world that has such people in it," he cries, and aware that the beauty he perceives is merely a polished surface over a hollow core. Bernard, ever the opportunist, sees in John a chance for social salvation. He discovers that John's father is none other than the director of hatcheries and conditioning, the very man who threatened to exile Bernard to Iceland for his nonconformity. In the world state, the word father is the ultimate obscenity, a biological tie that suggests an animalistic past. By bringing John and the decrepit Linda back to London, Bernard realizes he can humiliate the director and transform himself from a social pariah into a celebrated discoverer. He does not see John as a human being with a soul, he sees him as a specimen, a tool to be used in the petty games of status that even the alphas cannot escape. He arranges for their return, obtaining the necessary permits to transport the savages across the fence and back into the heart of civilization. The tension of this third act lies in the profound misunderstanding between the characters. John believes he is going to a paradise where the poetry of Shakespeare might finally find a home. Lenina believes she is bringing back a fascinating, if somewhat repulsive, curiosity. And Bernard believes he is finally taking control of his own destiny. They are all wrong. As the helicopter lifts off from the red plains of New Mexico and turns its nose toward the towering spires of London, the collision is no longer a theoretical possibility, it is an imminent disaster. The machinery of the world state is about to be tested by a man who possesses the one thing it cannot process, a sense of tragedy. The Soma dream is about to be interrupted by a scream from the past. As the neon lights of the city appear on the horizon, glowing like a radioactive sea, the stage is set for the final unraveling. The savage is coming to the city, and he is bringing with him the heavy, beautiful, and dangerous weight of the human heart. The velvet trap is still open, but the prey is no longer acting according to the script. The dream is fracturing, and in the cracks, the old ghosts are starting to howl.
The descent into London was not a fall, but a slow, calculated immersion into a sea of artificial light. From the pressurized cabin of the blue rocket plane, John watched as the wild, jagged geometry of the New Mexican desert was replaced by the terrifyingly perfect circles of the world state's urban planning. The city did not grow, it repeated itself in a fractal of efficiency. There were no alleyways for shadows to hide in, no crooked steeples reaching toward a silent god, only the towering monoliths of the glass and steel hives where humanity was processed like honey. To Bernard Marx, looking out the same window, these lights represented a triumphal return, the coronation of a man who had left as a pariah and returned as a conqueror. But to the savage, leaning his forehead against the cold glass, the glowing horizon looked like the burning embers of a world that had already died. He whispered the words of Miranda,
the lines he had rehearsed 1,000 times in the silence of the Malpai. "O brave new world that has such people in it." He said it with the breath of a believer, unaware that in this city irony was the only thing more abundant than Soma. The reality of London hit John not as a revelation, but as a sensory assault. The air was heavy with the scent of ambergris and sandalwood, pumped through the ventilators to mask the smell of biological existence. The sound was a constant low-frequency hum, the collective vibration of millions of machines and millions of contented souls. It was the sound of a heart that never skipped a beat because it was never allowed to race. The reception was immediate and overwhelming. Bernard, seizing his moment, orchestrated John's entry into society with the cold precision of a biological engineer. He was no longer the stunted Alpha Plus with a reputation for melancholy. He was the keeper of the savage. He moved through the high-altitude penthouses of the world state's elite, basking in the reflected glow of John's strangeness. For a few weeks, the man who had been mocked for his height and his temperament was the most sought-after guest in the city. He tasted the luxury he had always envied, and in doing so, he became the very thing he had once loathed, a willing cog in the machine of social validation. While Bernard ascended, Linda vanished. The world state had a very specific way of dealing with the inconvenient. Linda was a living memento mori, a sagging, wrinkled reminder of the one thing the system could not tolerate, the passage of time. To the inhabitants of London, she was a monster. Her face was a map of experiences they had been conditioned to find repulsive. Dr. Shaw, the authority on such matters, didn't see a woman, he saw a technical error. His solution was elegant in its cruelty. He placed Linda on a permanent Soma holiday. In a small, sterile room overlooking a park where children were conditioned to play hyper-organized games, Linda lay in a chemical cradle. She was fed lethal doses of the yellow tablets, drifting into a timeless, painless, and utterly empty eternity. She was happy, the doctors insisted. She was experiencing the ultimate dream. But John, sitting by her bed, saw only the slow erasure of his mother. He saw the woman who had taught him to read, who had told him stories of the other place, being dissolved by the very paradise she had spent 20 years yearning for. The ghosts of her past were being bleached white by the laboratory lights. The tension between the savage and the city found its nexus in Lenina Crown. Lenina was the quintessential product of the world state, beautiful, pneumatic, and entirely devoid of internal conflict. She wanted John, but she wanted him within the parameters of her conditioning. She viewed his refusal to sleep with her not as a sign of moral depth, but a frustrating mechanical failure. She took him to the feelies, the ultimate evolution of the cinema, where the audience could feel every touch, every scent, and every fabricated emotion through the metal knobs on their armrests. John sat through 3 weeks in a helicopter, a mindless, sensory-heavy epic of lust and high-altitude romance with a growing sense of horror. To the thousands of alphas and betas in the theater, the film was a delightful stimulation. To John, it was a blasphemy against the human spirit. He looked for tragedy and found only sensation. He looked for love and found only a rhythmic, chemical compulsion. When the lights came up and Lenina turned to him with eyes bright from the simulated passion of the screen, he saw the void. He saw that she was not a person, but a perfectly tuned instrument of the state's pleasure principle. As the weeks turned to months, the novelty of the savage grew to sour. The high society of London grew bored with his outbursts and his penchant for quoting dead poets. They wanted a pet, but John was a prophet of a religion they had no vocabulary to understand. He began to withdraw, refusing to attend the lavish parties Bernard arranged. This defiance triggered Bernard's inevitable descent. The man who had climbed so high on John's shoulders found the air getting thin. The invitations stopped coming. The whispers returned, sharper than before. Bernard's arrogance turned to a frantic, sniveling desperation, but the machine had already decided he was redundant. The tragedy of Bernard Marx was that he possessed enough individuality to feel the sting of rejection, but not enough character to survive it. He blamed John, he blamed the system, he blamed everyone but the mirror. The fracture finally broke wide when John was taken to see the children at the Eton laboratory. He watched as they were conditioned to hate solitude and love the group. He saw the Delta twins, identical in their thousand-fold mediocrity, performing tasks with the mindless efficiency of insects. It was here that the Soma dream truly turned into a nightmare. John realized that this world was not just a mistake, it was a tomb. It was a civilization that had traded its soul for a steady supply of endorphins. He felt the weight of Shakespeare's ghosts pressing against his ribs. He would later tell the world controller, "I claim the right to be unhappy." But for now, the scream was still trapped in his throat. The end of Part 4 arrives not with a bang, but with a phone call. It is the call from the Park Lane Hospital for the Dying. Linda's Soma holiday is reaching its inevitable conclusion. The chemical buffer that has protected her from the reality of her aging body is finally failing, and the systems are shutting down. As John rushes through the sanitized corridors, passing rows of identical smiling nurses and children being death-conditioned with chocolate creams, he knows that the collision is finally here. The past and the present are about to meet in the one place the world state cannot fully sanitize, the moment of departure. The velvet trap is closing, and the savage is alone in a city of millions. The machinery of London hums on, indifferent to the small, messy death of a woman who didn't belong. But in the heart of the savage, a fire is being lit, a fire that will either purge the city or consume him entirely. The dream is over. The screaming has begun.